Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. How are we feeling? We excited? Excellent. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Wayne Law, to our guests and visitors, to our students. Thank you so much for being here today. We hope that today's conversation will be fruitful for you and fulfilling and inspiring and motivating, especially as we enter final exam period. Welcome, everyone. My name is Assistant Director Veronica Beltran. I am the Assistant Director of Student Engagement and Culture in the Office of Student Affairs, and I have the pleasure and honor of being the MC for today's event. So we're first going to get started with hearing remarks from Acting Dean Lance Gable, who is a professor of law at Wayne State University Law School, and he came to us as a faculty member in 2006. He is an internationally recognized expert in public health law and bioethics, and previously served as an interim dean from 2016 to 2017 and associate dean from 2014 to 2016. Acting Dean Gable teaches courses in public health law, bioethics in the law, and torts, and his research explores the intersections of law, policy, ethics, and health. He has authored and edited several influential books and reports, including Research with High-Risk Populations, Legal Aspects of HIV/AIDS, and COVID-19 Policy Playbook. His work has supported organizations such as the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, the World Health Organization, and the Pan American Health Organization. Before joining Wayne Law, Acting Dean Gable was a senior fellow at the Centers for Law and the Public Health at Georgetown and Johns Hopkins Universities and practiced healthcare law in Washington, D.C. He holds degrees from Johns Hopkins University, the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and Georgetown University Law Center. Welcome, Acting Dean Lance Gable.
Thank you, Veronica, and thank you all for being here. This is going to be a great discussion, a great event. We're excited to be part of this, and as you all know, I mean, being a law student has its ups and downs, its challenges, its exciting moments, and its stressful moments. But what we're hoping that you're all getting out of your experience here is not just a great education, but also you're building a community and you're building your professional identity. And doing that really benefits from knowing more about each other. You've already had a lot of chances to do that in your classes and in all of our events around the law school. But part of that building of an identity is also understanding more about people around this building and people who are faculty, people who are in our law school administration. A lot of us have gone through the same experience that you're going through now. And through the pressures of law school, through the aspirations of trying to figure out what you're going to do with your lives. And tonight we're going to get a window and hear more about the experiences of our dean, now interim president of the university, Rick Bierschbach. Dean Bierschbach, I should say President Bierschbach, excuse me. I'm still not quite used to that.
I love the dean title. So.
Has led this law school extremely well for the last 8 years. And he has a really interesting and inspirational backstory, and I know we're going to get into that today. But I hope what you'll all take from this event is that you're learning about each other, learning about the differences that we all bring and the different experiences and the different aspirations we all bring and take forward in our careers is really part of building that community that we should be getting out of our law school experiences. And just want to welcome you all here for that. I'm going to turn the program back over to Veronica.
Now I have the great honor to introduce 2L Jennifer Ramos, who is the Vice President of the Latinx Law Student Association, which that organization also is a member of the Wayne Law Diversity Coalition. And if you all have noticed, our front row students are sporting a T-shirt, which this event is in collaboration with the Lawyers Look Like Me campaign. And we're very excited to launch this. It's been 2 years since this T-shirt campaign has been launched with alumni. And so we're very excited to bring it back this year. And we welcome now Jennifer Ramos to share remarks in relation to this campaign, the coalition, and today's event.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for being here today. My name is Jennifer Ramos, and I'm a current 2L, and as Director Beltran said, current Vice President of the Latinx Law Students Association, also known as LALSA. As a member of LALSA's executive board, I also form part of the Wayne Law Diversity Coalition, which is a student-driven umbrella organization that helps unite Wayne Law's multicultural and ally organizations under the shared mission of supporting law students from historically underrepresented backgrounds. These organizations include LALSA, the Asian Pacific American Law Students Association, Black Law Students Association, Middle Eastern Law Students Association, Muslim Law Students Association, Outlaws, and the Women's Law Caucus. As a first-generation student myself, the Lawyers Look Like Me campaign is a personally meaningful effort that both speaks to my own success in accomplishing my dream of attending law school and of my desire to uplift other underrepresented students that might feel like their own dream of attending law school is unattainable. As a proud eldest daughter of 2 Mexican immigrants from Jalisco, Mexico, my parents always told me that the reason they gave everything up to come here to the United States was so that they could give my siblings and I the educational opportunities that they did not have access to themselves in Mexico. At a young age, I realized that reading and writing were my strong suits, and my dad would often joke that I had the argumentative nature of a lawyer. After seeing current Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor get appointed to the Supreme Court, I began thinking about my own future and the possibility of taking my dad up on his suggestion and making the possibility of being an attorney a reality. So I became the first in my family to graduate from high school, the first in my family to graduate from college, and now the first to attend law school. Yet to say that the journey was full of challenges and obstacles is an understatement. From figuring out what the Common App process for applying to college was, to how to study for the LSAT, to how to even pay for higher education, the process often felt lonely and doubtful. I didn't have anyone close that had ever experienced what I was going through. And I often questioned if I could even make it to law school after all, because I just didn't see other Latino attorneys in the spotlight. During my time at Wayne State as an undergrad student, I met Director Beltran, who quickly became an invaluable mentor for my journey to law school. Seeing her as a successful Latina lawyer and her constant guidance have helped me be where I am today. She introduced me to other Latino women in law, which made the fact that roughly 2% of attorneys in the United States are Latino women a bit less of a daunting figure. So as I stand here today, almost halfway done with my own law school journey, efforts like the Lawyers Look Like Me campaign help me give visibility to the diversity in the legal profession that we may often miss. It allows me and my fellow students in the Wayne Law Diversity Coalition to show the next generation of aspiring legal professionals that lawyers do in fact look like me and can look like them too. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, for your remarks. All right, now for what everyone came today for, the Fireside Chat. Dean Oswald's premiere as a late-night talk show host. And as I introduce Associate Dean Oswald, he's the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at Wayne State University Law School, and he teaches and writes on labor and employment law with a focus on union campaigns, the National Labor Relations Board, strikes, and collective advocacy. His current research examines the role of independent unions in new organizing and is forthcoming in the Yale Law and Policy Review. Oswald is also a co-author of 2 leading labor law casebooks. He joined Wayne State in 2022 and previously served as Associate Dean for Research and Faculty Development. Before that, he was a faculty member at Northern Illinois University College of Law and the interim director of the Martin H. Mallon Institute for Law and the Workplace at IIT Chicago-Kent College of Law. Earlier in his career, he worked in the Office of the General Counsel at the Service Employees International Union. Dean Oswald earned his undergraduate degree from Haverford College and holds law and theology degrees from Duke University. After law school, he clerked for the Honorable Sonia Sotomayor on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. And introducing Interim President Richard Bierschbach. who was dean at Wayne State University Law School. An award-winning teacher and leading scholar of criminal law and procedure, his research examines how the criminal justice system's institutional and procedural structures intersect with its substantive and regulatory aims. His work has appeared in top law journals, including the Yale Law Journal, Michigan Law Review, Virginia Law Review, University of Pennsylvania Law Review, Northwestern University Law Review, and Georgetown Law Journal. Before joining Wayne Law, Interim President Bierschbach taught at Yeshiva University's Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law, where he also served as vice dean and twice received the Best Professor Award. Early in his career, he clerked for Judge A. Raymond Randolph of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit and Justice Sandra Day O'Connor of the U.S. Supreme Court, and served in the U.S. Department of Justice's Office of the Solicitor General and Office of Legal Counsel. He also practiced appellate and Supreme Court litigation at several major New York law firms. Interim President Bierschbach earned his BA and JD from the University of Michigan, graduating first in his law school class and receiving the Henry M. Bates Award, the school's highest honor.
All right. So, hi, everyone. I am Michael Oswald. It truly is an honor to be here to have a chance to learn a little bit more about someone who has really enhanced this institution all around us in many ways, but doesn't like to talk about it too much. So I think we're going to have fun. I think the only thing we're missing is a house band, but I'll note there are microphones up here, so if anyone has. So let's start at the start. Where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit about your early life.
Okay, I will. But before I do, I just want to say thank you all for having me. And I want to especially thank the 1L students who I was talking to at, oh my gosh, it's been a long day. Where were we? What was the, thank you, Tin Roof. We were just sort of talking about our journeys to law school. And I got to talking about mine, which, as Dean Oswald said, I don't typically do. And at the end of it, it was sort of like, more people need to hear this about you. And we sort of like, oh, we should do a fireside chat. It was kind of a joke, and here we are. And I'm glad we're here. So thank you for having me here. So where did I grow up, and what was my early life like? I grew up outside of Grand Rapids, Michigan, in Wyoming, Michigan. If you're familiar with Michigan, which many people here are, Wyoming is really a blue-collar suburb, and that was sort of my upbringing. Pretty blue-collar, right? Pretty sheltered, honestly, but sheltered in a good way. I was a happy kid, but my dad worked nights in the steel case factory building chairs, and so I didn't see him very much when I was little. He would pick me up, drive me to school. That was my 5 minutes, and he worked really hard. And my mom was a preschool teacher, so she was sort of my the main parent I had when I was growing up. It was sort of your working class, your working class upbringing, right? I played outside. I didn't have, I wanted toys, but we couldn't afford them. My dad would get laid off sometimes. Sometimes he had a paper route to support us. It wasn't easy, but it was stable. And, I got to see how hard my parents worked. I had an older sister. It was the same way for her. And I was surrounded by kids, who were in similar circumstances to mine. And so I didn't feel really different at that time. Now, where I grew up was really conservative. In my particular neighborhood, there were a lot of kids who went to Calvin Christian school, so a lot of Christian Reform kids. We were religious, but we were not, we were Methodist. But I thought that was normal. I thought if you took a slice of any part of the United States across the entire country, half the kids would sort of go to the local public school and half the kids would go to the Calvin Christian school. I just didn't, right? That's what I mean. It was pretty sheltered. I didn't know. But it was, it was a good childhood.
So, going back to those early conversations at the tin roof, and also something you talked about during orientation, which was that you are a first generation, or at least your father did
Yeah.
not graduate from college, and your mother was a first generation American.
Yeah.
How did that in particular shape just how you thought about your own future, if at all?
Yeah, I would say I wasn't really even fully aware of that because I was so in it, if that makes sense. So my parents, just to zoom out a little bit, my parents both grew up on farms, right? And my dad had 5 brothers and 5 sisters, and was dirt poor. So they grew everything that they ate. They raised everything that they ate. He butchered all sorts of things. They fished to catch their fish. There was a little river that ran through their property. They really only bought things that they couldn't make. They even would make their own flour, right? They would have to buy like sugar, right? Hard to make sugar. So they would buy things like sugar, and they would buy it in these huge sacks, and they would make dresses for his sisters out of the sacks, right? So that's how my dad grew up. And my mom grew up also on a farm on the first generation point. Her parents were from Poland, and she had an older sister who was born in Poland, and 2 brothers. And her dad stowed away on a boat in like the late 20s to come to the States. He was underage, did all sorts of jobs, didn't speak English, was a lumberjack, was a barber, learned to cut hair. We got a job in a hotel pressing pants and learned to cut hair and things like that. He went back over, met my maternal grandmother, brought her over right before World War II. And she was Jewish, although that was never talked about when I was growing up. I didn't even know that. And a lot of her family died in the war. And so they came to the States, and they were, they didn't graduate high school. They maybe finished 7th or 8th grade. They didn't really have a record of that, but my mom knows that they didn't graduate high school. They came to the States. They settled in Chicago, along with many other Polish immigrants. And my grandmother hated it. She hated the big city, and she wanted to live somewhere where she could have cows and make cheese, like the way she grew up in Poland, right? And so my grandfather, it's a long story, but it's kind of I didn't only realize later that all of this really informs my identity, right? So my grandfather took a bus to try to find a farm outside of, just try to find some land outside of Chicago. And he took a bus up, the western side of Lake Michigan, and didn't find anything that they could afford. And so he took the ferry across, and was taking a bus down, and the bus broke down in a town called Hart, Michigan. So he walked into the town, and he walked by a real estate office, and saw an ad for a farm. And he went out there, and that's where my mom grew up. So they bought that farm, and they moved from Chicago. And my mom grew up, also like with cows and chickens, and raising a lot of what they grew. They had a garden. They didn't have as much land as my dad's family did, but my grandfather, because he had learned how to press pants when he was like a bellhop out in Spokane. He wound up all the way out there, like in his adventures across the United States. He opened up a dry cleaning store on their little piece of property. So that's primarily how they got their money. And so both of my parents grew up in they didn't have indoor plumbing. Like my mom, my dad too. They both had an outhouse. When I would go to see my parents, so when I would go to my grandparents, there was an outhouse you had to use, right? Now they got indoor plumbing later, but the outhouse was still there, right? Because they really didn't get it until much later in their lives. And there was the pump; they had to carry the water. So that's how they both grew up. And my dad really wanted to go to college, and he was a super smart guy. but he couldn't do it. It was viewed as the most impractical thing in the world, right? Because he was needed to work on the farm. But he was smart, and he was in a big Catholic family. And so one thing that did happen to him is it was decided he was the one who was going to be the priest. So they sent him to a seminary. He got kicked out after 2 years. He hated it, but he said it was his chance to get a good education. And he studied Latin, and he studied Greek, and he wound up going back and going to public high school. And the seminary is what really made him want to go to college, but it still wasn't viewed as practical. He joined the Air Force. He bounced around. He wound up, in Grand Rapids. So he was never able to go. My mom, she did go to college. She was the second person in her family to go to college. And the reason she went to college is because her older sister, who was born in Poland, went to college and showed her it was possible. And the way her older sister went to college, I think I actually said this in my message to the campus community if anybody watched it, is she saw an ad in a magazine for a work-study program where you could pay for college, and she convinced her parents to let her move down to Detroit, Michigan, and go to Wayne State University. And so she went to Wayne State, and my mom was like, I could go to college too. And so my mom picked cherries. That's what they did in northern Michigan in the summer to make money. That's what the youth did. They picked cherries. She picked cherries, and she went to central Michigan. And so, I think all of that is a long way of saying I knew college was a thing, but I also didn't feel like it was a thing that you necessarily had to do, or that everybody got to do, or that it was something that just would naturally come to you. And my parents knew it was important, but they didn't come from backgrounds where it was like, you got to go to college, you got to get into this and that. It was very, my mom and my mom's sister, they went to college because they wanted to, not because their parents told them to, right? And so, some of us grow up, or some people grow up in situations where it's like, from the beginning, how are we going to angle to get into the best college? My upbringing was sort of the opposite of that because of this life history. It was sort of like, our son's good, he's happy, we have enough food, we're good. So there just wasn't a lot of talk of college,
So obviously you're in the local high school, comes time to apply, you end up at Michigan for college.
Yeah.
And you actually stay for law school.
Yeah.
2 questions from that. If Michigan had a BA in law program, would you have been interested in that? And then second, this is a little awkward because you're an impressive guy, how'd you end up at the second best law school in the state?
Yeah, that's a good question. Those are 2 really good. I mean, I know I'm giving really long answers, and I'll try to slow down. But there's a lot here, right? So let me start at the beginning of your question about high school. So I'm in my public high school, and I wind up at U of M. And there's a story there, and I'll try to keep it short. But the gist of the story is, in my public high school, maybe 30% of the people went to a 4-year college, and maybe 40% went to a 2-year college, and maybe the other 30% didn't go to any college. So that was sort of and there was one guidance counselor, and you never heard anything mentioned like the Ivy League. I didn't even know what the Ivy League was in high school, right? The only people who ever came to my high school to recruit were the Marines, and the Marines were there in the cafeteria at their table 3 or 4 days a week because it was a really good place for them to recruit. But there were not colleges coming to my high school to recruit, right? And so I was good in math, and so my counselor says to me, you should go to General Motors Institute, which I think is now Kettering University, if I'm not mistaken, right? But General Motors Institute, because you're good in math and engineering is a good job, and that would have been a great outcome for anybody in my high school. And my parents just not really having any of this on their radar, and me not having any of it on my radar. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll go to General Motors Institute. So that's what I did. I applied. I got into General Motors Institute. Not even really understanding what that meant. But I also, because I was a Michigan football fan, I was like, I'll just apply to the University of Michigan engineering school. because my counselor told me I have to be an engineer, and I guess that's what I have to do, right? And but I'll never get in. And I got in. I somehow got into the University of Michigan Engineering School, and that is, I still don't really know why, and I probably will never know why. But maybe because nobody from my high school ever went there. I don't know. And then I went to engineering, and just to sort of tie back into something I said before, that was the first time. That was the first time where I felt like, okay, wait a minute, not everybody grew up like I did, right? What are all these people doing here who are on their second or third semester of college level calculus? Like, I didn't even know that was allowed. Literally, not even not possible. I didn't even know it was allowed, right? Like you could do that, let alone possible, right? What are all these people do? What do you mean private school? What's that? What are all these people doing here who went to, that's sort of how sheltered my upbringing was. And so I got to the University of Michigan engineering school, and it was really hard, but I was good at it, but I hated it. I didn't like it at all. And so I transferred after the first year. After the first year, I felt so out of my league. It's so out of place, more out of place than out of my league, that I thought I got to go to a place where there are more normal people, maybe more people like me. And I didn't know what that was, but I knew that there was another school with a good football team, so I applied to Michigan State. And I got in, and to transfer. And I went there, I toured the dorm, they gave me a dorm room, I was gonna do it, and then a friend of mine from my high school who didn't go to college was like, why would you, why would you do that? Michigan's a better school, just stay at Michigan. So I stayed at Michigan, so he sort of talked me out of it. And I stayed and did my second year of engineering, which I also hated, and then I transferred into the College of Liberal Arts, Arts and Sciences. And I wound up getting a degree in history because it was I had taken one history elective in the engineering curriculum. I had one elective to take, and I took a random history class, and I liked it. And it was the only way I could graduate in 4 years. It was to because the engineering curriculum is so prescriptive. You don't have a lot of electives that I had to take a certain path through, and I had my history credit, and I needed it, or I would have had to stay an extra semester, and I couldn't afford to. So anyway, I graduated with a degree in history, but I also took a bunch of philosophy classes. I fell in love with the liberal arts sort of because I had not been exposed to them as a high school student, and just took all sorts of them. And then when I graduated with my history degree, I had no idea what to do, and I thought I might want to get a degree in philosophy, a PhD. But then I was like, is that really practical? And how do you even do that? And then I thought, well, maybe I'll go to law school because that sort of combines history and philosophy and other things. But then I thought, no, law school is just for people who want to be in the corporate world, and I don't even know what that world is, and that's not me. But maybe, so I applied to law school, and again, I didn't apply very widely, and I couldn't afford much, but I applied to Michigan. And I got in, and then I was like, no, law school's just not going to be for me, right? I don't want to do this. And I didn't know what to do. I was totally aimless. I still no guidance. My parents were still even at that point, right? Didn't really know what to make of a guy who started out in the Michigan engineering school and graduated with his history degree. And so they were sort of get a job, at Steelcase or something. And that didn't sound good. So another buddy of mine who didn't go to college was like, I'm moving to Tucson. You should move to Tucson with me. I'm going to open a cafe, and you can help me. And so I said to Michigan, I'm not coming. I'm going to defer my admission, and I'm going to Tucson. And I went down to Tucson, and I was in Tucson for the whole summer. And it was the second time, I never thought of it this way, the second time this happened, it was, 6 days before law school was going to start. And I was sort of thinking, did I do the right thing? And I wasn't sure. And my buddy said to me, I love having you here, but let's be honest, you're never going to go to law school if you don't go now. And so I called up the U of M admissions dean, whose name I still remember. It was Dennis Shields. Called up Dean Shields, and I said, do you think I can still come? And I now know that he looked at the class size and looked at how the sections were formulated and all of that stuff, and probably if they needed my money, and figured out that there was still a seat for me. So I bought a one-way ticket on Southwest and flew back and started in Michigan Law School. And the answer to the other part of your question is the reason I probably the reason I went to the second best law school is, again, just everything, ignorance yet again, right? Like ignorance of sort of what the options were and what kind of education I would have gotten at Wayne State. But that was my route to both to Michigan and Michigan Law School.
So law school must have clicked for you, I'm assuming. Do you have a favorite class, or?
It did click. I was pretty hooked. I went in thinking, I mean, I really went in thinking, I'm going to try this, but I suspect I'm going to like decide after a semester that it's not for me, because obviously I was pretty on the fence when I went. And like 3 days in, I was like, oh, this is the thing that I didn't know existed that I find really stimulating. It did really click for me. I'll say again, I won't belabor it, but I'll say again, the feeling that I had when I got to Michigan in the engineering school, I had tenfold at Michigan Law School, of being surrounded by people who came from backgrounds of privilege that were totally unknown to me. So that was part of it that I had to navigate. But I loved the substance, and I loved the ideas, and I loved how it made me see the world in a different way. Did I have a favorite class? That's a tough one. I had some. I would say I have some classes were more memorable than others. Right now, often like it was based on the professors, really. I mean, I was kind of, I liked everything in law school. I was a pretty big nerd. I mean, I even I fell in love with tax. I see Professor Beal back here. And Professor Bird Poland. And that was another one where I took it pass fail, because I was like, people told me I had to take it, and so I took it pass fail because I thought I was just going to hate it. And then at the end of it, the professor, Doug Kahn, calls me in and he says, I only have one question for you. After he grades the exams, he wants to talk to me about my exam, which I passed. He's like, why did you take this pass-fail? You got an A+. And it was like that's how. But I loved tax, but I also loved jurisdiction. I really liked torts. I really liked my property class. I didn't like civil procedure too much. Sorry to all of my civil procedure colleagues in the room. Didn't like civil procedure too much. Yeah.
So, I mean, that kind of diverse sense of interest, maybe that helps explain sort of your next moves, which were also diverse and really impressive. I mean, you have 2 clerkships, you're at the DOJ, you've got big law. Did you have a guiding principle? Like, what was pushing you along kind of any of those paths? I know that's a big period, I know, but a really formative period.
Yeah, it is a big period, and super formative. I don't think, my guiding principle was to do what I thought was interesting and meaningful, and to do something to do that thing, not to do it as an end to something else. That was always my guiding principle. When I was making decisions in law school, I wanted to do a clerkship because I thought a clerkship would be really interesting, not because you do a clerkship as a step to something else. And maybe that's because even in law school, I still didn't really fully understand how certain things could be steps to other things. I was the guy who sort of was like the last person to understand the importance of law review, right? Or the last person to understand. I mean, I figured it all out from people I knew, but I did not come in knowing that stuff the way I realized when I got to law school. Some of my peers at law school had come in not only knowing that stuff, but sort of having prepared themselves for that kind of thing, when they were in college or even earlier. I mean, there were people who, told me they knew, in 9th grade, of the 3 justices they most wanted to clerk for, right? It's like, That doesn't make any sense to me, right? I'm like, I didn't even know there were justices barely in ninth grade, right? So I mostly did things because I thought they would be interesting and fulfilling and meaningful and challenging. And so that's how I wound up doing my first appellate court clerkship. That's how I wound up at the Office of Legal Counsel. And that's how I wound up as a Bristow Fellow in the Solicitor General's office. And that's how I wound up clerking for Justice O'Connor. And I wasn't afraid to take risks. And I wasn't afraid to fail. I didn't take that personally. And I think both of those things helped me a lot because, I'll tell you how I got the Office of Legal Counsel job, which was one of the greatest, most interesting jobs I've ever had. For those of you who don't know what the Office of Legal Counsel does, it's the office, one could say it used to be the office, but that's a little bit of commentary that I probably shouldn't get into, but it's the office in the Department of Justice that advises the executive branch, and in particular the Attorney General in the White House, on the limits of executive branch authority. That's sort of the most, and resolves disputes between executive branch agencies. So it's like the arbiter when, the terrorism and violent crime section of DOJ and the environmental, policy section of, the environmental natural resource, have a fight over, or EPA have a fight over some regulation. It's like the arbiter of that, right? I learned about that office I think my second year in law school. Maybe it was my first year. And I thought, oh man, that would be so cool, advise the Attorney General, so I'm gonna get any kind of summer internship there. So I applied for a summer internship and I didn't get it. So then the next summer I applied for a summer internship and I didn't get it. So then my final summer, this is after I was graduating, going on to clerk for Judge Randolph, I applied for a summer internship and I had a 10-week job lined up at a law firm in DC. And I applied for a summer internship also before accepting that job at Office of Legal Counsel, and I didn't get it. And at that point, they probably were like, can this guy not take a hint, right? Like, he's just not gonna get this job. And I would call, not in an obnoxious way, but I would, did you get my application, that kind of thing. And so it's almost summer after my third year. It's like April, and I've accepted the job at the law firm, and I get an email from someone at the Justice Department. Oh, and I got a job. I got a job in a different section. So I had my facts a little bit wrong. I got a job in a different section in the commercial litigation section of the Justice Department for that summer also. So I was splitting my summer, 6 weeks and 6 weeks, something like that. And and it's April, and that was lined up, and I get a call from someone or an email from someone at the Office of Legal Counsel saying, we need some unpaid help, turns out. And I think they were just sort of desperate. We need some unpaid help for the summer. Are you still interested? And I'm like, oh my God, I accepted all these other jobs. What am I gonna do? This is a disaster. And anyway, I wound up working it out so that I could shave a little time off my commercial litigation commitment and spend 3 weeks at OLC. I just wanted my 3 weeks. And I worked my butt off those 3 weeks. And still remember I worked on some recess appointments issues, some sort of legal issues and a few other things. And got to know a bunch of people, and built some relationships, and because of that, when I then later on had a gap year in between my one of my clerkships and my Supreme Court clerkship, I knew those people, and had some people I could go to and say, hey, I'd like to be part of the Office of Legal Counsel, and that helped a lot. But and that's how I wound up getting the Office of Legal Counsel job in part. But it was because I got rejected 3 times, but kept going back, right? And there's a similar story about the Supreme Court clerkships. So I would say, the principles were to do those things because I wanted to do them, and to not be afraid of taking those kinds of risks, to mix things up a little bit, to not be discouraged by failure, another example just on the Supreme Court side, and then I'll stop. I got the Bristow Fellowship job at the Office of Solicitor General. I had that offered to me the day after I was a finalist for a Scalia clerkship. And the Solicitor General at the time, Seth Waxman, gave me 24 hours to decide because they had other people they wanted to hire. So I called up Scalia. Yeah. Justice Scalia, yeah. Hey, it's Bierschbach. You might remember you interviewed me for a clerkship. I really could use some advice. Solicitor General Waxman offered me this thing. It's obviously a super great opportunity, but I would really, really love to clerk for you. And can you give me any indication of where this might be going, right? Sort of phone call. And he said, look, I really liked you, but you're the first of 8 people I'm interviewing, and I don't know. And I said, well, what do you think I should do? And he said, I really can't tell you. I can't tell you what I'm going to do, but I can tell you that people who do Bristow Fellowships have a very high likelihood of getting Supreme Court clerkships. And so I said, okay, I'm going to, pull out of the Scalia. So I said, I'm going to withdraw my application. I took the Bristow Fellowship, and then the next year I got the O'Connor clerkship.
So you're at the firm, and you end up making a turn into teaching. What prompted that? I think people might be interested to know what you taught, and how'd you like it?
Yeah. So what prompted that was there's a pattern emerging here, right? Of me seeing something and then just sort of doing it without thinking too much about what that would involve. So that's sort of what happened there. So I was at Wilmer Hale, Wilmer Cutler and Pickering way back then, and working as an appellate associate in the Supreme Court and appellate practice, and the brother-in-law of another associate there was at Cardozo Law School. And he knew I had been a Supreme Court clerk. I met him a couple times, and they needed somebody to teach some classes. So they weren't hiring a tenure track professor, but they needed somebody to teach some classes, not just as an adjunct, but it was sort of what you would call a visiting assistant professor, or sometimes called in the lingo a podium visitor, like somebody who's not going to be a member of the full-time faculty, but is going to be at the school full-time teaching more than one class. And so they said, we need somebody to teach some classes. Would you want to do that? And I had sort of thought, because I love law school so much, that I might want to be a law professor, but had been having so much fun in my actual real law jobs, which I had thought in Tucson, I was going to hate, right? That I kind of gotten a little bit off track toward being a law professor. I hadn't done that much about it. So, so I said, yeah, what would I have to leave my law firm job? And it's like, well, yeah, you would. And you'd take a 73% pay cut and, that kind of thing. And it was, and I was like, okay. So I was living in Manhattan at the time. I was like, well, if I'm going to do this, I guess I might be living in Manhattan anymore. So I moved way into Brooklyn because I couldn't afford it otherwise. I was renting, right, like all New Yorkers. So I moved way into Brooklyn where the rent was like a third of the cost, so that I could then do this visiting assistant professor thing at Cardozo. And the classes they needed taught were criminal law, which I had an academic interest in and had some experience with when I was at the Justice Department. So I was sort of comfortable with that. And corporations, which I had done stuff in the area of business associations as part of my litigation and some of the regulatory stuff, but really had no business teaching corporations, to be honest. And so, but beggars can't be choosers, as the old saying goes. So I was like, yeah, corporations sounds great, right? The way when I ask my contractor if he can do something, and he's like, no problem, even though he's never done it before. It was kind of the academic version of that, right? Yeah, I can put a window in like that, right? It was me, yeah, I can teach corporations. So, So, I mean, I remember working, it was like 18 hours to prep for a 50-minute class, because I really wanted to do a good job teaching corporations that first time through. So I get there, I teach criminal law, I teach corporations, but then I also start to write criminal law scholarship. And I write my first article with a guy who is now a Third Circuit judge, used to be a professor at Penn. At the time, was a second-year professor at Iowa. And that article came out in the Yale Law Journal, which was a huge deal for a junior professor. And that then prompted Cardozo and some number of other schools to say, like, do you want to be a tenure-track law professor? So then I sort of kind of went on the market, but I liked Cardozo, so I stayed there.
Okay. And I take it you like teaching.
I loved teaching. I loved teaching. I had 125 students in every class except criminal law because it was a first-year class, so the sections were limited. But what wound up happening to me is after a while, because I was teaching so many students, they were like, what a workhorse, they moved me out of criminal law. And so I taught corporations, and I taught administrative law because I had a lot of experience with administrative law from my time in the government. And so my typical teaching load was 3 125 student sections each year. And it would usually be either 2 of corporations and 1 of administrative law, or 1 of administrative law, or 2 of administrative law and 1 of corporations, which was fine. It only got hard, and my faculty colleagues will appreciate this, when I would teach like 2 corporation sections at the same time, because I kind of forget, like, did I cover that in that one, or did I cover that in that one, right? That I didn't love teaching 2 of those in the same semester.
And then somewhere along the line, you start a beautiful family. If you're comfortable, how did you meet your wife? I feel like people always, I think it's a great question.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm totally comfortable. That happened at a party in New York where, I was single, she was single, but like the person who organized the party sort of invited all their single friends, but didn't really tell people they were invited. Anyway, like the typical thing, right? And I was going to a conference. I was going to Law and Society in Berlin. The Law and Society conference was in Berlin that year. So this is like a annual conference that once every 4 years is somewhere international. That year it was in Berlin. And my wife is German. And, we started talking about Berlin, whatever, and, we wound up getting married, right? I mean, not that night.
Yeah.
And so she, and then we had 2 kids, and we were like, living the dream, such as it is, in New York City. We had a house in Brooklyn. I was working at Cardozo. She's in the art and auction world. She was working at Christie's auction house. Our kids were 5 and 2 years old. Her parents were in Germany. My parents were still here in the same house in Wyoming, Michigan that I grew up in. And, that was sort of what happened. And then I got a email and a phone call that Wayne State was looking for a dean. I mean, that's what happened. And then, and at that time, we had been thinking about maybe wanting to be closer to one of our families. And, moving to Germany wasn't really on the table. For a lot of it would have been not good for either of our careers. And so it was sort of the thinking was maybe we'll move to Chicago, maybe we'll move to someplace like that, And then this Wayne State call came, and I was interested in it because I knew how great Wayne State was as a university and a law school, and in particular because I knew what its mission was and how its mission really resonated with my life's trajectory. And then I came out, to do the interview, and I met the faculty and all of that stuff, and sort of saw how good the law school was, but also where it could go, and got a sense from the faculty that there was an appetite to do that if the right person were in the deanship. And then honestly, for a while, thought I didn't get the job because there was this long, anybody who was here who was in that dean search might remember there was sort of this long period of silence before anything happened. So I sort of remember my wife and I saying, well, it would have been hard to move the kids anyway. Like literally we had that conversation, and then like very late in the day, got a phone call from the provost offering me the job and had to really scramble to move out here. And landed in Huntington Woods because it was the only place at the time that we could find a house. I mean, it was a very hard housing market at the time. And because we were the suckers coming from New York City who were like, can you believe these prices? And like way overpaid for a house that, was very affordable by New York standards and way overpriced by, the standards of Metro Detroit. So that's how I landed there.
What's been your favorite part of being a dean? And then also, what's been most challenging?
Yeah, those are great questions. Favorite part is hard. I mean, they're both really hard. I think the favorite part is being in a position to move an institution forward that you really care about. And everybody can do that in the seat in which they sit at the law school. Every student can do that. Every faculty member can do that, right? Every staff member can do that. But you can do it in a bit of a different way as dean. And being able to do that and to see that impact over time and to have people say to you, right, how much they appreciate that impact, and to have alumni say to you, thanks for what you're doing for my school and how much this school meant to me. So it's being able to contribute to something that you believe in and that is meaningful. And being, and like I said, being able to do it from the dean seat is a special way of being able to do that. So I mean, I feel like I'm here for the same reason that most of my colleagues are here, and that many of our students are here, and it's because, not just because we want to be a law professor or we want to go to law school, but it's because we believe in this law school and the mission of this university and how this law school does things. And so to be able to do that from the dean seat is really special and meaningful. And as dean, I always would say, and I say it as the interim president too, I'm just one person. And so it's really satisfying. You can't move an institution without everybody wanting it to move. And it's really satisfying to have a great group of faculty colleagues and see them debate things and be really thoughtful and respectful of each other and make the hard decisions and take the risks and launch the new programs that move a place forward. And to see them, take student success seriously, that's really satisfying. And then to see the students do the same thing. And it's even things like the lawyers look like me, to come up with ideas that are about what's special about our institution and to put those into action. I think that, to me, is like the most satisfying thing. And the most challenging thing is, you can always be better, right? And an institution can always be better. And there are so many ways to make it better all the time. And that's not saying that it's bad. It's just that anything can always be better in a lot of ways is, to figure out what to prioritize. You get pulled in a lot of different directions. You get blamed for everything, even a lot of things you have no control over. Although honestly, I feel like that has been, that's been hard, but like this is such a welcoming and collaborative community that I know deans who have that a lot worse than I did here. But I think it's challenging. You feel spread really thin. You feel like you can't be all things to all people all the time, and you feel a need to be that way. You have to use every different muscle that you've ever used to be successful in the dean job. So you need to be a credible and legitimate scholar and understand what that means, and you need to be able to speak that language and make judgments about that are going to have the respect of your faculty colleagues. You need to be a good teacher and understand the importance of that. You need to be a good mentor, right? So you need to be all those things you need to be as a faculty member, but you also have to be a really good institutional citizen and understand how that can affect the trajectory of something. You also have to be really good at budgets and finance and resource allocation and understanding how to make hard financial decisions and how to, what those trade-offs could be. You also have to be a therapist, right? To a lot of people. You have to be a really good listener. You have to not take things personally, right? You have to be able to sort of understand that it's not about you, it's always about the institution, right? You have to be a great cheerleader, right? You have to be able to build relationships with all sorts of alumni who don't share your political views or even necessarily your values, but they still want what's best for the school. You have the best interests of the institution at heart. You have to be able to manage down. You have to be a good manager of the staff and keep them motivated and they're working really hard. But you also have to be able to hold them accountable. You have to be able to manage up, right? Manage the provost, manage the president, manage the... So, you've got to be able to do so many different things at once that you sort of feel like you're going from like a different game to a different game to a different game. And that's tricky. And you have to do it all through the lens, I believe, to do it well, of putting the institution first, and of also understanding that you're a dean, you're not a CEO, and you're not a boss. You are the boss of some staff, but you got to be a good boss. But for the most part, as a dean, you can't approach institutional change the way a CEO would approach institutional change, because you've got to work within the way academic institutions operate, and that's a shared governance model. And if you appreciate it, it's a really good thing, even though it can make things happen more slowly. But if you don't understand it, or you approach it as if it's a constraint or a barrier, it can make a dean's job really miserable.
Do you still feel like at times you're between two worlds, or is it kind of like, I got this?
I totally feel like I'm yeah, I would say that's actually, it's a really big question. Like we could go pretty deep on that question, but I still totally feel that way. I never feel like I got this. I probably shouldn't say that sitting here as an interim president. It's probably like a breach of one of my duties, but we're not simulcasting this or anything. And I don't mean by that like I never feel like I got this because like there's something terrible about to happen. I just I never expected to be a law school dean. I never expected to be an interim university president. I never have felt fully up to any of the roles I've stepped into, right? And so I think I've learned that you rise to the role, right? You don't step into any role fully prepared for it. And if you are stepping into it fully prepared for it, or you think you're stepping into it fully prepared for it, that's probably evidence of some error in judgment on your part, right? Because it's or character flaw in the sense of it shows maybe a lack of appropriate humility for the task you're about to take on. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't be confident that you can take the task on. You've got to step in with confidence in your own abilities, but you got to understand you don't know everything, and you're never going to know everything, right? So, look, I can say after 8 years of being a dean, I felt more comfortable being a dean, but I never felt like I got this. I always felt like there's more to do. I need to be careful X, Y, or Z doesn't happen. I need to make sure A, B, and C happens, right? And I think, I feel that way even more so in this role. People use the word imposter syndrome or the phrase imposter syndrome. I wouldn't necessarily say that, but I definitely would say for anybody out there who is feeling like I'm not going to be that thing, or I don't have what it takes to do that, or how could I ever do that? Like I feel that way all the time, right? and I still feel that way, and I'm sure if I go on and do something else in X number of years, I'll feel that way about that thing. I mean, I sort of have felt that way about every role I stepped into. And you just got to move through it, and really remember the basics. You got to be a good person, right? You got to listen to people. You got to, try your hardest. You got to put the mission first and the job. You got to put yourself last. Like all of that stuff it's really just getting back to basic blocking and tackling. You got to not be afraid of criticism and not personalize it. I'll tell you an anecdote. I know I'm weaving around a little bit here, but just on this point of feeling like, am I up to it? I remember going back to your question about what I taught, and I said I was working 18 hours a day. I did not feel up to that at all. And that in criminal law, I remember getting an evaluation my first semester that said, Professor Bierschbach needs to take a class on how to teach. Professor Bierschbach needs to take a class on how to teach. And it was, now there were a lot of other counterbalancing evaluations, but that evaluation hurt. And my evaluations weren't like terrible by any stretch that year, but they weren't great. Like that's not the year I won Professor of the Year award, right? And so it's just, I took that stuff to heart. I tried to make improvements, and so I feel that way in every job.
One thing I do know is that if any of us were to go to your home, we might hear a little Taylor Swift. Something Taylor says is that we need a squad to get us through the rough patches. Who do you rely on? Who's your squad?
You totally need a squad. Taylor's 100% right about that, and you would hear a boatload of Taylor Swift at my house right now.
New album.
Yeah, my daughter's about to be 11, and boy is she a Swiftie. So yeah, you would get more than your fair share. So my squad is a lot of friends from law school. Some friends from law school. Some friends from my days in Washington, D.C., in particular my Supreme Court clerkship. It's people who I feel like I've moved through some pretty hard things with. So some law school friends, the Supreme Court clerkship, other law school deans all around the country. I'm very close to some other law school deans. And so, these are the people I call when I feel like I can't turn to anybody else. And I know they'll answer for me. I'll know they'll make time. I mean, I had a few of these phone calls in the last few days, right? Hey, do you have 5 minutes for me, kind of thing. So that's my squad. And it doesn't really, it's not really about what period of my life they're from. It's about being able to be who I am and nobody else with them and not feel judged and know that they're just going to have my best interests at heart and help me try to work through things. And I feel fortunate that I have collected some group of people like that, and I try to be that for them too. But I would say, that's my squad. It's a mix of people from different periods of my life.
Speaking of those periods, what is something a friend from high school or college knows about you that we don't?
I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot there. So some maybe some fairly innocuous ones. I mean, look, I was super, super good at hacky sack in college.
Okay.
So I mean, that's
a great one.
That's kind of a big deal. I also I played a lot of Frisbee barefoot on the diag at U of M. I was that guy. That was me.
Yeah.
Like if you saw that guy, that was probably me. In high school, I was a black belt in karate. So don't get out of line with me.
Did not know that.
Well. Yeah. So yeah, there's a couple of things. I built chairs on the line at Steelcase to pay for college in the summers. I worked a lot of really bad manual labor. That job was actually a really good one, but I worked a lot of, my high school friends would know, I worked a lot of really grueling manual labor jobs to help pay for college.
Okay. What do you do now to wind down?
There has not been a lot of winding down as of late.
Yeah.
I wish there has been more. There's been a lot of winding up. For winding down, what I like to do is I like to exercise. I always feel better after I exercise. But it's hard. I mean, because then when I don't exercise, I feel guilty. Then that's not a healthy cycle, right? Then I sort of get down on myself. And then also after you don't exercise, then you try to exercise I don't know if this happens to you all, but for me, it's like you don't exercise for a while, then you exercise, and it's like maybe the least pleasant experience of your life, right? It just feels so difficult, at least for me. And so it's only once I get into a groove with exercise that I feel like it really helps me. But if I can get into a groove with exercise, I used to like to run outside, but it's been kind of hard on my knees and my ankles as I age. And so now I'll do it on the treadmill, things like that. We took up skiing, or in Michigan maybe you call it icing or something like that during COVID. And so we're really bad skiers, but we sort of got hooked on it. So in the winter, I do that to help me unwind when I can. It's kind of time consuming, but that really helps me unwind, I think in part because I'm a bad skier, so like I am locked in on getting down that hill, right? And so I cannot think about the like crisis du jour or the crisis of the hour or even of the minute back at work. I gotta like get down that hill, and then my hands are kind of cold. There's like so just, for me, I do it, and it's like I've been somewhere else mentally for a while, and I think that's healthy. And then, my daughter's always watching some like series that I worry as her father is mildly inappropriate like age-wise. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, right? At night. So I think, if I say this, I hope nobody thinks I'm a bad dad. I think right now she's watching The Summer I Turned Pretty, which I feel like is way too, but I feel like for 11-year-old, right? So I'll watch an episode or two of that with her, if I can, and that helps me wind down. So stuff like that. We go to Germany every summer, and that's really important for us because we get to see my wife's family, and my sister lives in France, and so we get to see her. And that has kind of become an inviolable trip, and I will still do that trip. I'll do it on a different schedule this summer, but that's an important part of. I work a lot from there, but it still sort of feels like it's not necessarily a wind down, but it's like a change of scenery that helps me, recharge in a way.
So we're just about at time. I'll just end by asking if you have any advice for the people in the room, either first-gen students or students who are just entering a new world and wondering about their place in law school.
Advice, oh man, that's a good question. I think the best advice I guess I can give is that you're already what you need to be. Like don't think you need to be anything other than yourself to be successful, right? We all come at these journeys from different, different backgrounds, different life perspectives. You now know a little bit more about sort of my own personal history, and I've always felt like a fish out of water. I still feel like one, and not just in the sense of, am I ready for this job, but like, am I an East Coast guy? Am I a Michigan guy? Like, am I I spent a lot of time in this, surrounded by circles where it's like, if you weren't going to an Ivy League school, that was weird. And it's like, am I in that group or am I in a different group, right? Like I always sort of feel like I've gone between a lot of sort of different social circles and economic circles. And I've learned, that feeling used to make me uncomfortable and sometimes even resentful, particularly, I would say, in the years when I really was having my eyes open to the kinds of advantages some other people had that I didn't have. And I know that I had certain advantages just by virtue of what I look like and my gender, right? I know all of that. But I was getting exposed to some of this other stuff as well. But then I came to realize that was what made me who I was, right? And so I think that lesson that like you're already what you need to be successful, and you can count on yourself And you have what it takes, and don't be afraid to take risks. And don't be afraid to fail, because we all fail multiple times. And I told you about some of mine, but there's a lot more I could tell you about in that department. That's just a normal part of the journey. And especially for anybody who's in here listening to this, you're already in a great spot on that journey, and you don't know where it's going to go. And be okay living with that uncertainty. I don't know. I don't know where my journey is going to go. I didn't expect to be an interim president 9 weeks ago, right? If you would have asked me, "Are you going to be the president of Wayne State?" I would have said, "Heck, not in a million years. No way." For 1,000 reasons I can list right now, and yet here I am, right? And so, when you're presented with an opportunity that might make you a little nervous, don't be afraid to lean into it, and don't second guess your ability to get it done. I think is the advice I would give.
Well, on behalf of all of us, thank you for everything you've done for the school, the university, and especially for taking this time with us. It's been cool.
Thank you, Michael.